Video, video is coming. So at least I can confirm that the video is fine. Now audio is something that you need to look at.
Yes, I cross-checked it. Your audio is fine. Yeah.
Cool. So hello everyone. So I have with me my good friend Bhushan, and yeah, you will know him by the name Rockstar Bhushan. So we were recently discussing how he, got his name Rockstar. He is very good with guitar. He sings songs. He used to perform a lot before he got into development. So yeah, we were briefly discussing about some of his experiences. Hi, Bhushan.
Hey, hi Amitabh. Yeah, thank you so much for inviting me. Yeah.
It's a pleasure. So, yeah, Bhushan, as we discussed, right, today we want to talk about coding and testing of our code, what we write. So, um, it has always been a very important topic for me. I have initially when I started, like many other developers, right, I used to hear things like you should write test cases for having a very confident deployment. It's a good practice, so on and so forth. So um, yeah, I mean when I initially started writing PHP, that was way before even code. I mean at that time Code Igniter was the basic PHP framework which was available. Obviously that time I didn't have too much experience, but then slowly when I started working with Laravel, I understood the ecosystem. I slowly got into testing because obviously the entire setup of Laravel is so easy to write tests, and I generally got the hang of the merits that you get when you write tests. So I would like to know what is your um, journey like in terms of how you came to know about testing and how you have developed your knack of writing tests.
Uh, okay, so I would say like when I started my development journey, so I was a Java developer, but then I started my own startup, right? So for 4 5 years, I was running my own startup. So one of the client told me to build one platform using
Right,
Laravel, and then I got to know about Laravel, and then I think it was five or something, five plus something version was there,
okay,
5.1 or 5.2. So I started with that, and then I got to know about Laracast, and Jeffrey Way is the legend, right?
right,
I'm a big fan of him. So I watched his lot of videos. I got to know about testing, how he's doing testing, how our applications are backed by some test cases, so that
right,
our production is not broken, is not broken, right? In any case,
right.
so I found this really cool, and from then onwards, like I switched many languages, but still in each language I try to write test cases. So this is how it evolved. Yeah.
Great, great. So yes, I think we generally whoever have written test cases, they will know that you know writing test cases definitely gives you confidence.
Hmm.
Um, there have been several applications where I have personally felt that some complicated business logics, if they didn't have those test cases, the testing team would have really had a very hard time with every release that we do. And if you are pushing very regularly, I think it becomes a very huge burden in the release process. Additionally, also one thing which I very strongly believe is writing test cases does help you improve your coding style, your overall architecture, how you architect your problems, right? Um, s- Let me start with at least some of my examples, and then I will ask you to share a few as well. So when I started. In Laravel, I initially got to know about the service pattern. I felt it is very nice because your business is inside a different thing. You are following the MVC pattern, but your code is somewhere else. But then I used to make certain kinds of mistakes, like I'll send the entire request object to the service and access some of the request input variables from there, and maybe create an insert a row in the database. Okay, and then so far it was fine. I mean, the code used to work obviously, but then when I started writing my tests, I started realizing a problem, which is I am not able to test my service in isolation because that service depends on the request object. Which means now every time I need to write a test for my service, I'll have to entirely fake the request class. So that is one example where I felt it continued to make me think whenever I'm writing certain functions. What is the dependency? Um, what are the parameters which I'm taking, and what it takes to mock those parameters, or rather than create that environment where I can create that test. And if I feel that the environment creation of that environment is difficult, then maybe there is some to simplify things, because maybe I'm architected wrong. That is at least something which I feel. um, what is something you have
I
experienced?
definitely agree. Definitely, 100% agree. So because I have, like, to be honest, when I was doing testing initially, I didn't have much idea like how we can test, but I was just doing like all the test will have this end to end thing, right? So I'll just
Right,
send the request and I'll just check this response, and if things are working, means whole flow is working, everything is tested. That's what I was thinking initially. But
right.
then I started working for one European company, and then this company was actually focusing a lot on uh, solid
Hmm.
and design patterns. So then, based on that, I understood that the code can be like we can use solid principles. Class should have only single responsibility and all this stuff, right? And based on that, I started writing code, and then I got to know my test cases were really small, really segregated, and I'm only testing only one thing in one single test, right? And that makes me really confident, right? So if something breaks,
Right.
only that thing is breaking, right? Exact thing. I
Yeah,
Because
exactly.
previously, imagine what I was doing. I was sending the request and checking the response, right? Imagine something is broken in the service, right? So I have to like comment out and then check what is going on, that comment out few code, and then go,
Right.
or debug points and then go inside, and then exactly know where the things are failing. So I think
Correct. So even if it is failing, you don't exactly know what went wrong.
what
You
is,
just know
yeah.
that something went wrong.
Yeah,
Right. Right.
exactly,
Right.
exactly.
Yes, that's a very very important point. And yeah, so if, like, if your service is doing three things, you can write an integration test, integration which like end to end test, where if a request is coming, you check for the response, right? You can do that. But obviously at some point you should also have a test case for every three thing that is happening. For example, if it is registration, then if the user was inserted into the database, you need to check whether that assertion happened, the database insert happened or not. If you are raising an event which can eventually trigger an email, you need to check whether that event was raised or not. Something else, I don't know, maybe that some connection to the third party, because if you don't have these test cases, and if something failed, as Bhushan said, right, you'll have to start adding loggers and check where exactly things were going wrong. Okay, we have a question, I think. Devjit is here. Hi, Devjit. I'm using Cypress for Next with PHP unit for Laravel. They both tremendously boost my confidence when I do PR. True. So yes, Cypress is definitely something I have been recently hearing in many requirements which we get. It's a testing library, not very heavy like Selenium, and you can write JavaScript, so which is a bonus.
Hmm.
Good to know, Devjit. Yeah, it's a good practice. Okay, so I think at least one point which I wanted to cover before I start showing examples is, um, I feel at least initially every user should focus on the three different kinds of tests. they should at least understand what is the boundary of each kind of testing. First one being the unit test. So as Bhushan said, right, if you have a service class which is doing three things, then there should be three unit tests which are confirming the proper execution of those three things. Um, the next higher level is the integration test. So your request is kind of calling the service class and invoking a method out of that class, right? Then you would expect that whatever happened within that request, you are testing that. That's your integration test. And Bhushan, correct me if I'm wrong or a better way to explain it. And yes, I think the third one is browser testing, something which just Devjit mentioned, which is you use third-party tools like Cypress, there is Selenium, there is the Selenium version or a light version of Selenium for Laravel called Dusk, right, where you actually mock the user's behavior. uh,
Mhm.
for example, if you have a, again, it's a very simple example, but if you have a lock-in screen, you focus on the text field, you type something, you focus on the password field, you type something, and then you hit the submit button, and then you assert that on certain page you are seeing this. And certain interesting things which when Dusk released was I could hear people actually writing some test cases to automate their bill payments, which was very
Oh,
interesting in a way. Yeah. So,
this is
uh,
interesting.
right. So, you can write scripts which can automate form submissions. Obviously, if they don't have captcha, you can actually bombard with form submissions, although we don't suggest doing that. But yes, this kind of things can happen.
But this is
Right.
nice actually.
Yes, yes. I saw those kind of tweets on Twitter and I was like, wow, people
Wow.
get really innovative with things.
Right.
So, yeah. Right. So yeah, this is the second point which I wanted to cover, which was about what are the what are different types of tests which you can write. Um, how does the devs start testing? Maybe this time, Bhushan, you can start with um, what is your feeling, because as I said, I think I tried learning in a very chaotic way. So maybe I'll start with you. How did you manage to
E-
learn
Everyone
testing?
starts like this only in a chaotic way. So initially, as I told you, right? So I was just doing end-to-end test. I was feeling
Right.
that okay, if I have covering that one test case have covering that endpoint or whole flow, so that means I'm okay with that, right? So that's what
Right.
my thinking was initially. But then I saw a lot of videos on the topic itself. I started learning things. I started learning about design patterns, how I can segregate my code, how I can dry up my code. So after some experience, it improved, and after that, like now my test cases are quite specific and
Hmm.
it's quite small as well. So it tells me exactly what is failing. So that is
All
one.
right. Right, right. Yeah, one interesting thing is I always initially, right, before I think I got very good resources from Jeffrey Way and even Adam Wattam, is I always felt that there was no very clear path for me to follow and understand what is the 101 of testing, how you proceed, how you improve your skills.
Hmm.
Um, uh, I think you said Java is something which you used to work on initially. Did you had a very similar experience with Java as well, or is it only PHP where things were a little left for you to kind of explore and
So
figure out?
to be honest, like when I started, right? So initially, I was using Java FX to create desktop applications, and
Right.
I was not writing any test case there. Once I got to know from that client that I need to use Laravel for this project, and then
Hmm.
I started exploring the Laravel project. Even that project also, we had two versions: one with core PHP and one which I developed due to some cases. I had to rewrite that in Laravel.
Okay.
Few developers left the company, and that's why we had to stop there. And also, client said that we should use Laravel, so I redeveloped it. and that's when I got
Right.
to know about Laravel. After that, also, maybe 5 6 months or a year after that, I got to know about testing. And initially, I started like roughly only, so just test
Hmm.
the whole flow, and that's it. And then once I like slowly got to know about these different techniques, how we can mock things, how we can like do like there are some operations which we can do before each test, right, or after
Right.
each test, those stuff. So as my understanding started going, and then after that I started implementing it, and then I started uh, implementing that, and then got to know about it
Slowly
slowly.
things
Yeah,
started to evolve, right?
so,
Right.
yeah.
Right. So I think, yeah, I think we
And
then we
also,
generally share a similar experience. Yeah, you are saying something?
okay. So and also initially, like when I was doing testing, right, and I think this will resonate to a lot of people as well, that like when we write test, right, so we don't know what to write there, or what to actually test, right. So that
Right.
thinking actually took time for me to develop, right. So what exactly I have to test, how I'm planning to test, right. So watching a lot of art, like watching a lot of videos, reading a lot of articles, like a lot of stuff after that, like books as well. I read a couple of books as well about testing, and
Okay.
then got to know a lot of stuff, and these things got involved.
Right. Okay. So I'm very much a visual learner. I don't remember reading too much books for learning, except for the initial phase where I started learning PHP, because at that time internet was not 24 hours available to you. But yeah, even as similar grounds, right? I think initially I felt testing was very difficult. I couldn't figure out very clear paths. Until I watched a few videos from Jeffrey Way and one particular course from Adam Wattam, which is test driven development,
Mm.
helped me um, get the lay of the land. Okay, like, yes, this is where, this is how you set up things, this is how you need to approach. Although he did a complete TDD thing, but yeah, the main thing was the approach, how to think about writing tests and stuff. That definitely helped me, and I think that course is very interesting, because even though a lot of years have passed, I still sometimes refer to that, because it doesn't grow old. The concepts are so useful. It doesn't grow old, doesn't get outdated. Certain things have changed, but yeah, those are all syntactical sugars,
Those
I
are
think.
actually evergreen things, right? So those understanding,
Yeah, yeah.
those are evergreen. And I think there was one thing which I really liked and which opened my like mind, like which blew my mind, was to have three things. Like first, you set up the word, do the action, and do the assertion. So
Exactly. Yes, I was
that,
trying to remember that there are three very
yeah,
clear steps which we need to do. Yes, and yes, everyone who is trying to learn testing, I think you need to understand what this concept is. It's a very important thing that in every test, first is you set up your world. Why we say set up your world is because the understanding is that every test that you execute, at that point you are starting fresh. Okay, you don't carry any data, any baggage from your previous test. So your database is fresh. You have new variables, and then you set up your environment. Then you do certain actions. For example, maybe you send certain parameters to a service class which did a calculation, and then you assert that the two parameters which you send will result in, let's say, some x number. So that is your assertion. So this is how typically things will go. Very basic stuff, but yeah, I think it is important to know.
yeah.
um, right. The fourth question which I have in my list is, obviously, how do we decide what should be tested and what not? So this is a mix feeling for me.
Mm-hmm.
Have been working with very different kinds of clients. Some of them um, were very strong, very hard on the timelines, and that definitely means that we can't always do 100% code coverage kind of an estimate. Um, However, there are there are clients who understand the merits of testing. So what under they understand the thing that if I am saying that we are going to take 12 hours, maybe the 2 hours is the testing time that we are taking, right? Because um, you need to understand that writing tests will take time. So the initial effort, let's say if you take some uh, 10 hours to do something, you will maybe take initially about 1 hour or 2 hours to write your entire test to cover the entire code that you have written, which initially may sound like a big investment because you are 20% plus. But then they do understand that if it's a product, if you are playing the long game, right, then it is going to reap benefits in a big margin because you will save time when you do the deployments. Um, so when we have to take that judgment, what we do is take decisions like what are the key features where the application will stop working and the business might get affected, and we try to cover them
Mm-hmm.
rather than the entire code coverage. At least that's what I do with my team whenever we have these kind of situations. What is your experience in this?
Mm-hmm.
You have been working with multiple companies, and now what I understand is you are working with PayPal, so they have very strict um, you
Obviously,
know
it's a huge product, right? So they have to take
right.
a
so
lot of
so
countries, rules, compliances. There are a lot of
exactly.
things. Yeah, yeah. So I
So
would say,
how
like,
do they decide?
yeah, yeah. So I would say that when you mentioned, right, so about 12 hours, right? So like, for example, if new developer joins the team, right, he might
Right.
take some time, he might understand things. It will take a little bit time, right? But when the developer is like getting more and more involved in the product, right, so then this writing those test cases, understanding the code, actually business logic, figuring out things, right, that becomes actually also helpful. Just to add one more point, what you mentioned. Yeah.
So basically, what you mean to say is like if someone is new to the application, these test cases help him understand
Hmm.
the application.
Right.
Right.
So right, and also
Yeah.
if he's writing something, right, so he quickly knows that because of those changes something is broken, right? So then
Something is
he
broken.
understands. Yeah.
Yes.
So that also gives the new team members to join and join quickly and grasp things quickly. And also
True.
the for the older developers, like if he or she is writing a lot of test cases, right, so at some time, if those developers are taking 2 hours for writing something, right, after that it will get reduced, so that also saves time there. So that is also
Right.
one thing. Yeah. And coming back to this PayPal thing, so in PayPal we are actually serving the whole world, right? So there are different countries have different compliances. So for obviously for all the products we do, we do write FTs and UTs, unit tests, functional tests. So we have actually certain flows, right, which are business critical, right? So for example, there will be some things like we'll just prioritize those with some labels. For example, let's say L1, L2, something like that, or L0, L1, something like that, right?
Right.
And based on that, if those test cases are failing in the flow, then we are not allowed to release, right? Because those are important, those are business critical, right? So these kind
Right.
of things we have in PayPal, so which is quite helpful for us to understand and not break things in production. So
Definitely. Right. No one wants a sleepless night, right? So
yeah, yeah.
definitely. Yeah.
Actually, it's a
So
fortunate and unfortunate thing. So everyone wants to break things in the production, but at the same time, he or she don't want as well, right? So
right.
it's like a mixed thing. People
True.
wants to brag about it, but they don't want to face it as well. So it's mixed.
True.
Yeah,
It's almost like the helmet that you
yeah,
you want
yeah.
to spend money to make sure that when you need to use it, it it protects you from what it from the most important body part, but you never want to be in this situation where it is actually being used. So
Right,
true.
right.
Right. Um, right now, one more question which I have is, so obviously I think by now we both understand that our uh, approach was more like understanding how testing works and then write the test cases. So I'm assuming we can't just say it's a test driven development approach. At least what I have realized is I still don't have the um, you know I would say still, let's say, the confidence to do a complete test driven development. I still write my code, okay, and then I um, write the test cases, understanding what are the
Mm.
important things that I need to cover. So I say it's a development driven testing, if
Testing.
that term exists. What is your thought about this thing? I mean, how important do you think is test driven development, and uh, what's your experience with that?
So honestly, like in Laravel, I have always followed. Like once I got to know about TDD,
Hmm.
and after this Adam Wadham's course, right? So I was doing TDD only. So I write test cases first, and then I write the code. So that is what I am following. But also I've seen some situations where I don't know what to write, right? What functionality, how I can achieve it, right? Then I just want quickly to set up something, right?
Right.
And get it work, like get it done, right? So in those cases, what I do is I write the code. I try to make it work in weirdest fashion. I don't like, just it should just work, right? If I
Right.
want
Right.
to, if I'm expecting one, so I'll just definitely return one. That's it. So
Right.
I write code like that, and after that I'll write some test cases to back it up, and then I'll just start doing some refactoring stuff and all this stuff. I'll try to improve the code. Maybe I can just like for example, in one single function I have written 100 lines of code, so I'll try to segregate few things. So that kind of stuff I start, and then I try to write UTs. So mostly I start with FTs, and then when I feel that my code is quite segregated, it's dried up,
Right.
then I try to write UTs. So this is how I
Right.
am
Right. So
following.
I think that's a very similar thing which I also discovered. So as you said, right, I when I get some idea, I will first go into the routes file. Maybe it's the
Mm,
web.php or api.php, right?
mm,
And inside that, I'll start getting my there. I may end up with, I don't know, depends on the code, maybe 20, 50, 100 lines of code,
mm.
and then I write the test, because and now that I know that yes, my test is going to cover me up. When I make a mistake, I start refactoring code that I can segregate. And yes, exactly as you said, after that I do the unit tests
Even
just
now I
once.
can recall one example. So there was one European project, and in that, after all the development, after all the APIs, routes, and everything, client wanted to add ACL.
Okay.
Okay, so access control list. So
Yeah.
user should have rules and permissions and all this stuff. Okay, so and this code and these things were a lot of like got a little bit complicated, right? So just to play with it, we just like we wanted to test out different approaches, what we can do actually. It was a
Hmm.
multi-domain like product.
Multi
Huh.
domain. Okay, so a
multi
multi tenant architecture.
Not multi-tenant actually. So for example, on b.com, right, there is one product, and then a dot like on subdomain, some other part will be there, something like that.
Okay. Okay.
Not multi-domain, not completely different domain. So it was like that. So we want to do something which can be reused in both the places, right?
Right.
So at that moment, we tinkered a lot of different approaches in different branches. We
Hmm.
evaluated that and what can be really useful, and we can scale it up. And then we fixed we decided we will go with this approach, and then after that we started writing test cases to back it up. So it was it
Fair
was
enough.
yeah.
Right, right. I think that's the thing. If it is working for you, then it will be working for others as well. So that's
Mm.
really not a problem.
So it helped us there, right? Mm.
Right. Okay. So with some of these points discussed, I think what I want to show as few sample things is, again, these are very basic examples, but um, what I have tried to come up with is this. Let me share my screen. And where is my code? So, Bhushan, is my screen visible?
Yes,
And is the code readable?
yes, it is readable.
Right. So, to talk about some of the points that we discussed today, right? I wanted to take two examples where I felt that it's a good scenario to differentiate between a unit test and an integration test. So the first one being, a user registration. I couldn't get a simpler example. So what is happening over here is, as maybe I'll show the test first. So
Mhm.
it will help understand what exactly is happening. So user registration, right? So as we can see, I am first validating the actual validation rules, because it is quite possible that the business has certain kinds of requirements that these fields should be captured. Let's just say there is some application where you need to have the mobile number. Without that, nothing, the user should not get created because of certain policies that the company has, right?
Mhm.
So this is what I'm doing, which is, I'm making an actual post call to my endpoint, which is an API, and my API.php, right, which is user.register. I send an empty array, which means it will result in a 422, which is Laravel's way of defining a validation error, right? And then I'm checking whether these fields are present in my uh, validation or not. I mean, the errors or not, right?
Mhm.
The next thing which obviously I did was to validate whether a proper email address is coming or not. Now, at some point, some of you may feel that yes, I'm testing the framework, but the thing is, because it's an API, you want these test cases to pass. You don't want your developer to mess with the rules, and hence I always feel that these things should be tested. So these
Mhm.
are some of the validation rules that I added, and then there is this assertion, which is our happy path, that if everything is fine, right? If this data goes in where I have a proper name, I have a proper password, and a proper email, I do this, and that results in me asserting that a user was created with this email address, which is postdata.email. So this is, I would say, one very simple, integration end-to-end test. I make a
I think
request.
it's the best example. And just to add one more thing here, so
Yeah,
just like what we did, like what we mentioned, right, in the TDD flow, right? So
right.
just set up the word, do the action, and then assertion. So in controller, I have four steps. Like first, authorize if that request is allowed or not. Then validate, and then do the action, and then return response. So I think in this case, and what you have explained, it does exactly the same thing, which is perfect example in my opinion.
Right. So here I set up my word, as you said. I take the action, and yeah, the assertion is done.
Mm.
Now, this was obviously a very simplified example. I know, in real life you won't get so easy examples every day, but yeah, at least these are some parts easy to explain certain logics. The second thing which I felt requires a unit test is something called as a referral action. Basically, I have two users in my database, and what I am trying to do is, let's say, when Amitav is referring Bhushan, so what the application will do is it will record in a table that I referred you. That's the basic thing to do. So I have this um, code, again, not the best way to execute, but what I'm doing is I'm validating the two IDs. I didn't do a route model binding. I felt this is fine. So I have a data where I validated that the IDs were coming and they actually existed. So these two users should be there in my database.
Correct.
Then this is where I said, it is not the best example because I'm querying them again. If I
Mm-hmm.
do a route model binding, it should be two more extra queries. But let's say I have user one, which is the user who will refer, and this is the referred user, right? And then I send it to my referral service saying refer user, the first user who is referring, and the second is the user whom I am referring. If it returns a false, then it's a 400. And if this is returning something, then basically my code says that, okay, 201, a record was created, right?
Mm-hmm.
So this, I felt I could show some examples of why we should have both kind of tests. Um, so, so what I did over here was, I created using the factory. I created two users because, as I said, in every test, right, we get a fresh instance because my test is using refresh database, which means when this function is getting called,
Mm-hmm.
I have a clean database. I'll need to create those two users. I created them, um, and then I'm making an HTTP call to this route called user.refer, which is over here, right?
Mm-hmm.
And then I send these two things which are getting validated. They will get validated because database entry is there. And then using the Fluent API, I am doing certain kinds of assertion. I'm I'm basically testing whether the user ID and the referrer ID is, what was sent. But this is basically the integration which I was trying to do. I could have done an assert of the database as well. But then there is a few more things which are happening which didn't get covered very uh, in details when it goes to the service, and that's where I felt that the logic should be tested. So for example, in this code I'm first testing whether the reference, I mean whether I have referred you already or not,
Mm-hmm.
and hence I'm taking a count. So the first user ID, the second user ID, which is the referred ID, and then I take a count. If I see that the count is greater than 0, I return false. And now this was not getting tested in my integration test easily, other than, I'm sending again a response, I mean, I'm creating one response request, which is referring the user first, and then making the second request where it would fail. So what I did was, I created one referral instance where I passed this two users. So the first user ID was passed, then the second user ID whom I'm trying to refer, right? And I save that. And then my unit test, what it will, sorry, just let me pull that out. Right. So I create this instance of my referrer service, and I first call my service to you know uh, make this insertion, and then I again call that service with those same two users, and this time I am testing whether this false statement is being captured or not, because if the count is more than 0, which will happen in my test when I am, where is that thing? I think I made a mistake in my refer service, right? It's interesting. It should have a test thing, right? So yes, so if I first call this function, the service function, and then I second time call this function, it will return me a false statement because that thing was already present in the database, and that's how this line of code got covered. So that's what I feel are the two simple examples where um, like you can decide when to um, write a unit test and when to write an integration test,
Mm-hmm.
right? Uh, Now, you have any additional inputs on certain kinds of situations where you have felt have taken this strategy?
I think it was insightful, and we like you have already given a lot of general ideas, right, for the people who are interested in testing. So it's good actually. Yeah.
All right. Um, so I think I am uh, done with my share of points, which I really wanted to discuss in
Mm-hmm.
this session. Let me bring my main window back.
Mm-hmm.
Right. Yeah. Generally speaking, this is what I wanted to cover. Obviously, this is just an introduction to what testing is, how you should approach it, what kind of code we can expect in
Mm-hmm.
to write when we are testing certain kinds of functionalities in our application. But there's definitely a lot more things in details when we dive in, right? And that's something which we want to cover definitely. And yeah, that this is really the um, I would say the first episode of that the entire thing that we want to do. So maybe in the subsequent video we can talk about how certain aspects of uh, testing, like mocking things, um, or faking certain kinds of emails or events, are important to really test the business logic, is something which we should be covering. What are your thoughts, Bhushan?
I think I totally agree with it. We can do that.
Right. So, yeah, viewers, I think that's what we wanted to cover in this video. As I said, in the next video, we will bring in some advanced topics. Let's see, maybe that time we will switch seats. Bhushan will maybe take the lead and show us some of the stuff where he is very much interested and specialized in, and I'll be the spectator learning certain new things from him. All right, Bhushan, lovely talking to you. What it's about 42
What
minutes,
it-
so a small talk, I would say, but yeah, it was
Yeah.
very very interesting and nice. Yeah, let's plan that second video, and viewers, I will definitely bring that advanced topics for you on um, you know testing your application with maybe mocking certain things, faking events, faking mails, and stuff like that. So till then, bye, and yeah, see you soon.
Yeah. Yeah. Thank you for joining,
Yeah, bye.
and thank you for inviting me.